Well, it looks like time. We should finally finish up our shelf bracket project. It's been a fun little project. It's gone over 3 videos so far, and this will be the 4th total, although I'm calling this part 3 because the upset square corner was kind of a standalone video. But there's a playlist, and I'll link that at the end. So if you want to watch all 4 portions of this, there's a single playlist that will have all of that linked, and I'll have that at the very end of the video so you can find it. So our project now is going to be to assemble these. Before we do that, we have one little decision I think we need to make, and that is, do we like this or do we like this? And is there any reason from a practical standpoint that one would be better than the other? And I can't think of a lot, although you might use the open end of the hook to hang something under the shelf as a little plant hanger or something like that, which might make this a little bit better. But if you wanted to hang something up against the wall and use it as a little coat hook, which I don't think looks very practical, but somebody might, this option might be a little better. And you could do one way and one the other, but I think that'll look like a mistake. And I noticed in the video from yesterday that that's how I had them laid out, and it just didn't look right to me. I think I like this better, so I'm going to turn that over, and we're going to have to now lay this out. And this is close enough, you can just almost do this by eye and try and get this contact point the same distance from where your taper stopped on both of them. And then we're going to want to mark that point. Don't let anything move on both of these. And we're going to need to drill some holes. We're also going to need at least one hole here that will hold this to the bottom of the shelf. And it might not be a bad idea to have a second little hole over here. It's just kind of up to how much security you want for the shelf to stay. And if your shelf board might twist or warp, it might pick up in the back. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to add a hole there. Whether you use it or not is another matter. And then we'll put another hole down here to aid in bolting this to the wall. So let's center punch these. A critical part here when we center punch that is we want to make sure we're centered on both pieces, or you're liable to end up with this bracket kicked out somewhat funny because it's not centered. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but the better job you can do of centering this right in line, the happier you're going to be. That's a good place for this little square. Mark that. And this is a 1/2 inch bar, so we can make a nice centered mark there. And that's where we'll center punch that. This piece is a little bit harder to square off of because it's got a little bit of a taper to it. So if you're really comfortable, you can eyeball this. If you're not, hold this in a vise, it'll be a little bit easier, but you can still use the same technique. This actually is just a hair under a 1/2 inch. Doesn't need to be, 1/2 inch would have been perfect. Lock the scroll in the vise, and I put this little piece of pipe in there to support it so I don't flatten my scroll when I center punch this. Be gentle with the center punch to start with. If you need to move it over, it's easier if you got a small mark than a big mark. This also gives you one last chance to straighten this a little bit. A piece of pipe makes a nice little bender. So we want to do that on both ends. You'll also notice I put a B for the bottom and a T for the top. Of course, our pipe doesn't quite fit the same both sides. things might not go back together the same way if you confuse top and bottom, or if you confuse one bracket to the other. So I'm going to do just one bracket at a time. I'm not going to drill all the holes and put these in a random pile. You could number them, which is which, and that would work just fine too. I've got this set up under the drill press so that hole is facing straight up. You may have to do a little fiddling. You may be able to figure out a way to clamp it. Clamping it would be better, but as I've said before, I know I can stall this drill press out because it's really kind of wimpy, and that's to my advantage on things like this. So I'm willing to hand hold it, even though it's a don't do as I do as I say sort of a thing, and you're better off if you do not hand hold anything under the drill press. That one I'm going to have to think about a little bit. This one clamped up in the vise pretty readily, so we're going to go with that. So there we have two holes. And let's drill the holes in the angled piece. And here I need to decide where I can drill this hole and still be able to get in there and countersink this, because when I use countersunk flathead screw to hold the shelf. And I think the smallest thing I have to countersink is a portable drill, and it can go in that close. So that's where I'm going to want to drill that. Another hole for number 16, or number 3/16 hole for number 8 screw here, so we'll have 2 screws to attach that to the shelf. And of course the screw for the scroll needs to go in. Again, do your best to get these centered. If they aren't, you're going to have to deal with it. And this hole will need to be countersunk from the back for a flush rivet. Now I want to knock the burr off of all of these holes, but I don't need to countersink the anchor hole in the back. I do need to countersink the anchor hole, or the scroll mounting hole, so that I can get a flush rivet in there. Otherwise I'm just knocking burrs off. This one also needs to be countersunk. It doesn't need a lot, it's just enough to have a place to put a rivet head. There's no pull-out stress on this. The stress is all in shear. So you just need enough head on that rivet to make that work. I'll use a blackened screw for this when we can send it out. That's a flush screw now. That will hold that to the shelf. This holds it to the shelf, and I can, for there, I definitely want to countersink this. I think my countersink needs to be sharpened. Okay. But for this hole, we have a choice. We're going to use a square-headed bolt here because that'll provide the biggest strength. This one doesn't provide a lot of strength, but it might look better if you see that square-head bolt there as opposed to a round-headed screw. So I think I'm going to go ahead and drill a 1/4 inch hole here just to make that look better. Now, bolt will be at a little bit of an angle, but I don't think that's going to hurt anything. All of our holes are drilled, and our scroll lines up very nicely looking at it this way. We can get a rivet through here. There's plenty of room. Unfortunately, there's not plenty of room here. And I'll show you how to deal with that. This is a 3/4 inch rivet. It's not long enough. We need a 1 inch, 3/16 by 1 inch rivet in this hole, and it just doesn't quite go in. The tail of the scroll just kind of holds it up. So I'll show you how to deal with that. In the meantime, the 3/4 inch rivet does help us make sure everything lines up. If I can get it back in the hole. Of course, you can, at this stage, you can put it in from the back just for this purpose. So the next thing to do is to look at it this way. Does everything line up? And it does not. I managed to get a hole off. I don't know if my center punch was off, if the bit wandered because I didn't center punch deep enough. But I'm going to have to move this over. I'm going to take it apart. I want to look at it. Is it this hole that needs to move? And it could move just a little bit. And this one could move the opposite direction. So what I have is two mistakes, one in each piece, that magnifies the problem. So I'm going to have to work a little bit on both. Now how do we do that? We could drill a slightly larger hole here, but that will weaken this a little bit. And if we go too far, nothing's going to hold very well. That would weaken this quite a bit. So I think I'm just going to file over a little bit to correct that. And that does make a bigger hole, but not as bad as drilling a bigger hole, because that does it all the way around. Little chainsaw file is about the only thing that's going to fit in here. That's just barely. The lesson learned here is do a better job of laying out and center punching, and be careful when you drill it. But you can also find a way to fix it, in most cases. So we'll bring that back to center. That should do it. And then we want the same. That was the lower one. Yep. Now this one's going to be a lot harder to file because I can't get in there. And so let's look at how we're going to fix this. You'll often hear this referred to as a convenience bend. Just bend this piece out of the way. Just so that file can pass straight through, and then we'll bend it back. That gives me just enough room to get a file in there. Don't go too far. So I just heat it back up again in the same place and try to get this nice and even so it doesn't look like it's been kinked. Where you've removed material at that hole, this is going to be a lot easier to bend and get distorted. So be very careful. So that's ready to do another test assembly on. I've done a quick test fit of this again and everything lines up pretty good now, but I still can't get a 1-inch rivet in this hole, so I'm going to have to do another little convenience bend. This time I'm actually going to open that scroll up a little bit and then come back and just close it when we're ready to set that rivet. So, it's time to set rivets. I have a little backing bar like this that hangs out, and it's a good thing to hang something like this on. But this is not something most people are going to have for setting rivets in this situation. So we're going to do it a little bit simpler. We're just going to put this little piece of square bar underneath here. Lock everything up in the vise to make sure it's good and supported. And that will flatten our rivet head just a little bit, but that's really not going to hurt anything. If you want a perfect rivet, you might have to take a little different approach to this. But you'll also have to make riveting tools, and we haven't covered that yet. So make sure that rivet is good and tight up in here, because you'll never be able to get to it again. You'll have to cut it out or drill it out if you don't get it right. I'm going to go ahead and heat these. 3/16 rivet really doesn't need to be hot, but you're much less likely to deform your work if it is. So that one looks good. Now remember, this is too hot to hold on to now. Now we can sneak this rivet in where we've bent that out. We're going to have to fix that little scrolly bit. There we go. So everything fits. Put a little 1/2-inch bar back in there. Clamp everything up. And make sure it's all down good and tight. So that is all riveted together. Now we're going to fix this scroll we messed up to be able to rivet it together. This might take a little fiddling because it's kind of lumpy and bumpy. probably go to the anvil and do a little bit of this just to be sure. I still think there's a little kink in there, and you don't want kinky scrolls. But in general, that is a completed bracket. This is certainly a bit more of an advanced project than some of the things we have done, but I think it's still a good little project if you've been doing this for a little while and you're trying to get a little bit more serious. Doing these rivets can be quite fiddly to get everything to line up just right, get them to set just right. Don't look down on yourself if you have to drill these out and redo them because something didn't set up and you got a rivet head crooked or something of that sort. If things don't line up, take the time to make them line up. But do avoid the temptation to just put a little tack weld on each side of this and call it good. The rivet really adds to the look. It's the traditional way of doing it, and since we're talking about blacksmithing, let's try to stay traditional as much as possible. I'm not fanatical about avoiding welds, as you well know, but for something like this, I think avoiding the welds is going to be a lot better project. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you have time to go out and try and do that yourself. I know sometimes doing these videos, things get a little bit rushed, trying to fit everything in and get the video done in the time I've set aside to do it. And these can probably be a little cleaner, a little neater, and avoid some of the little issues I've had with lineup. But it also helps you see that those issues can be dealt with, and we can fix those. So take the time, try to do it the best you can. If it comes out a little off, see if you can fix it. If it can't be fixed and it's good, usable stuff, use it. And next time you'll do a little bit better and you will have learned something. It's okay to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes, but you don't have to make all the mistakes every time. So, in the meantime, I hope you like the video. Hit that subscribe button. Share the videos with your friends. Get out to the shop. Make something. Have fun. Wear your safety glasses. See you later.